Hello, and welcome to Broadcast Astrology. You're here with hosts Sarah Beckner and Lisa Petnichak, and we're coming to bring you the monthly forecast based on the lunation chart. Today, we're looking at the new moon in Virgo on September 2nd. And we're going to start today just by trying to speak plain English and giving you a sense of the collective atmosphere for our country for this month ahead and spend a few minutes fleshing out what we see. And then we'll transition into a little astrology for those of you who study. And we'll look more specifically at how we're arriving at this information, looking at the techniques and pulling in some Uranian astrology, looking at the dials and exploring those. So we hope you'll stick with us and enjoy the show. And Lisa, I'll let you jump in and just give me your general impressions of the month ahead.
Yeah, I think that this month and the month that we're looking at is from September 2nd to October 2nd, and that's from new moon to new moon. Looking at the Virgo new moon for this time frame. And broad brushstrokes, this is a month where we're really on the precipice. We continue to be on the precipice of change. And change from a human perspective is not easy. And I think that there's a lot that we're seeing expressing itself in this chart and a lot of the charts that we're looking at, which is there's this hopefulness, there's this belief, there's this real depth to our souls that wants to move forward and advance humanity and ourselves and our country. But we're coming up against roadblock after roadblock and bottlenecks and possibly making horrible mistakes along the way that we have to somehow recover from. But I think that the biggest theme that I see during this month is just that we're standing at the edge of the future. And we've been there, and there's no, I think that sometimes when you end up on the other side, you're there. There's no, and you're looking back saying, oh, we did it. We made the leap. And we might even be in the middle of the air right now. Like, we're not really sure. But the one thing I think that we do know for sure is that we're in it. We're in the grind of that creates change and the friction that makes life evolve. So that's my big takeaway.
I agree with you about the change. And I think when we did the initial Aries ingress chart, and we were looking at Uranus and how this is a year that's really propelled and punctuated by change. And then we look at these little charts every month, and it's just like the continue unfolding of those themes. One of which I think definitely is the instability and that anything can happen, the fluctuations. And then the other piece is centering so much around our belief system and how we feel the collective zeitgeist and what's moving through us as a nation, our beliefs, what inspires us, what are our hopes and wishes. And this chart looks a little tricky as far as the month goes in terms of it seems a little heavier in some ways than other ones we've looked at. Like we might be coming up against more resistance or things might feel harder or just I think just for working class people just going through the motions, there is a density around the whole thing, a little bit of effort, and we need to apply ourselves and be constructive, and we're not able necessarily to do what we want, how we want, when we want. And all of that is happening in the context of how we feel, how we're connecting with each other in our communities, within our families. Lisa,
Mhm.
I've told you my thoughts about I just feel like there's a strong tribal element to the chart, to the
Mm.
charts that I don't know where that's coming from. If we're trying to find some security, we ourselves are trying to sort out what can we believe in, what can we place our hopes in. But there's that piece of community and the friction and where is the community? How are we showing up in the community? Where do we feel safe to express ourselves? And you mentioned the mistakes, Lisa, and we'll see that when we start unfolding the astrology, but is there potential to make wrong choices or actions misled because we don't have clear discernment, because we're not
Mhm.
really reading the waters well?
Mhm.
So that's some of what I'm thinking about. I'm always trying to bring this stuff down to our personal lives. In this little window, we're the fish in the pond this month. What are we going to be contending with? And I think there's a piece of that, like a call for extra vigilance in terms of the actions we're taking.
I agree. People are searching for the truth with a capital T. And there's a lot of spiritual deepening happening, as we mentioned before. And I also think one of the themes that stood out for me is either children, the youth's voices, as well as possibly reproductive rights and just children in general, from children as far as reproduction goes, all the way into the students who are potentially protesting. And as Sarah and I spoke about, the students are heading back to school, and there's the potential for more demonstrations. The chart expressed quite clearly that students' voices are likely just going to want to be heard, and children's voices. It could be that we are being subject to information that's very surprising. And I really see that we are going to be having to deal with the unexpected in a way that feels slippery. It feels like the our grasp on reality is very loose. It's going to be overall a little dicey this month. And also on top of that, which is something that we were talking about, is that we're also entering into eclipse season this month. And the next new moon forecast that we'll be doing is going to be a solar eclipse. And in between that time, the next full moon in between is going to be a lunar eclipse in Pisces. And that lunar eclipse is conjunct Neptune. So we're seeing this huge Neptune emphasis really start to rear its head. And it has been in different ways, but we're just seeing it step into a different level. And I know that we're not talking about the astrology right now, but what that means is that we're going to want to take action, but the water's muddy. And we're not going to have a clear way of how to make these next steps that we know that we need to make that I was speaking to before. And the eclipse that's coming up is really going to heighten that. And I think that on the forefront of our minds as we're stepping into this month is that there's eclipses add a level of unpredictability in a different way than other astrological elements or times, just because it lifts up gravity. It just spins it a little bit, sometimes more than others. But this was particular eclipse season, at least for the lunar eclipse, is going to have this element of Neptune to it, where we might feel very driven towards something that in the end ends up having levels of falsity to it and doesn't bring us to where we want to go. And the potential, we're really yearning for this spiritual depth. And this month is going to be a month where we're going through the motions and figuring out what actually doesn't work. I don't know if many of us are actually going to find what we're looking for this month. I think that we're going to end up rummaging through the barrels, and we're not going to find what we're looking for exactly. We might find what we don't want, which can also be helpful. But if you're in those places, don't feel too frustrated, because that's just the nature of what's happening. And there's a reason for all of it. We just sometimes have to just surrender to the energies that we're subject to at the moment.
Yeah, Lisa, you made me think about some other things because, yes, that difficulty in trying to meet our aims, our trying to be successful in our conscious objectives, that part of the challenges with that will be just not having clear discernment or not having the right information or really seeing the waters clearly. But then there's that other piece of just resistance and possible, you made me think of possible consequences because Saturn is also karmic law. And so there's a piece of that. It's not just resistance and difficulty, but there's a piece that when we do the thing, there could be consequences, or it might not turn out like we wanted it to, or that sort of thing. And then one other thing I wanted to mention before we can go to the astrology is you were talking about the instability showing up in a lot of different areas in the voices of the young people in issues around rights, but also the money piece, which we had talked
Mm.
about earlier in the day. Some of this instability we feel this month is happening around finances and the economy. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's bad, but it is connected to gambling and speculation this month and of not really knowing how things are going to turn out. I just wanted to make note that the house of finance is pulled into this lack of stability in this month ahead.
Absolutely. Finances was something that we saw come up for sure. And it looks like there could be some risks that we're taking possibly in order to correct the financial situation in our country. It looks like the government itself is in quite a challenging circumstance as far as their money as well. And there's a tie-in too with climate change and just climate change rearing its head and having financial implications on our country's finances in general too. And the government having to really deal with that in ways that are quite tricky and maybe not putting them in the most advantageous position.
Yeah.
So,
I think it would be worth noting here for the non practicing astrologers among us or listening that how much we're personally affected by these global or the larger collective shifts really have to do with how these things are intersecting with our personal charts. But this gives just a broad sense of the weather collectively for our country. So, shall we move on to the astrology and pull up the charts and take a look?
dive in. All right. Here we have the Virgo New Moon chart. I really don't want to repeat too much of what we already spoke to, but whenever I look at a chart initially, I usually quickly glance at what's on the angles, just because those tend to be the themes that are reverberating through that month. And here we have both Apollon more closely, but also Poseidon. And we'll see once we reach the dial how they actually tie in much more closely and tell a much more substantial story than what they're telling here. This is just really corroborative for everything else. But this is suggesting that the deep need for spiritual truth is something that a lot of people are connecting over. Apollon can also be a signature for currency. And this has also cued me into, oh, finances or something that could be quite important this month as well.
And one of the things um, we have to make note of is where the ruler of the ascendant is located. And this month, it's in the sixth house. So we know that in terms of how we feel in general, our attitudes, where we're placing ourselves, and all of that, we're in the house of stress, of some level of work and stress. We're conjunct the south node. And so I do feel like it's like a month of diminishing returns.
Yes. And to know as well, L1 is in its domicile, which means that the people in this chart are actually in really good shape. They couldn't be in better shape, but they're just in a really rotten environment, and that there's some sort of loss associated with that. And so this is really just a wide lens picture of the people of the United States during this month. And then moving to the new moon itself, down here at 11 degrees Virgo, 4 minutes in the fifth house, which is nice. And this is what cued us off to speculation and taking a chance, as well as children and fertility and anything where you're putting yourself out there in order to make a difference in the world. But the fifth house and mundane definitely points towards children, as well as the stock market, because stock markets are speculative. And so, yeah, all of those things come into
There's
play.
also just a piece of entertainment and play. It's the part
Exactly.
of us, the children, the interests, the amusements. Maybe there's some medicine there for our survival mechanism, our coping
Yeah.
mechanism.
When I was looking at this, I almost wondered if there was going to be some really great art made this month, some great art that we got to enjoy this month just because of some of these placements. And I did feel like a reprieve, especially since we also have Saturn opposing the lunation in Pisces, and just how that is from a universal level, just saying that we're coming up against a lot of restriction and there's a lot of pressure and a big no that we're having to deal with, and just how challenging that is. And even though we're in a place where we want to enjoy and recreate and maybe have a lovely end of summer, early fall, that there's some somber reality checks that we're going to have to deal with.
Maybe the exploration of art will connect us with our internal guidance system, the wisdom within. Maybe that's part of trying to have a better sense of our beliefs or our discernment regarding how we navigate our lives, is to go ahead and go into the 12th house of exploring what needs to surface through the
Yeah,
subconscious.
I like that. I guess one more thing I just wanted to point out here is that we have Mars at basically at the anoretic degree. It's at 28 degrees Gemini, 56 minutes. And it's in a square to Neptune. And this is a really prominent thing that we're going to see once we hit the dial. But this Mars is conjunct the fixed star. I know a lot of people say Betelgeuse, which is a tough fixed star. It signifies calamity, danger. And I just wanted to point towards that because it does look like we're in for some more disruption this month. Abrupt and is surprising, feeling like we don't have control in the situation and feeling lost or like we have to surrender as we try to apply ourselves in the world. Also, that Mars is quincunx to Pluto, which suggests power struggles, not being able to handle the power that we have, or having the power could be a disadvantage in this situation as well. And this Mars also represents L7, which is foreign entities and governments. Just wanted to point that out. I keep saying this, but I really think that we will continue to see foreign relations rear its head more and more.
As some of our allies go through these Plutonian places, these threshold moments, how are
Yes.
we going to respond to that?
Yes, exactly. So here's the dial. We have the 90-degree dial up on the Aries point. And do you want to start speaking to this, Sarah?
So we have the Mars Neptune hitting the Aries point, and this is what we were mentioning earlier, just when we were just talking English. Like, this can be misled actions, this can be mistakes, this can be actions and passions fueled by beliefs and fueled by the subconscious. And here in the chart, we see Poseidon on that axis as well. So heightening that notion that we're swimming in these waters of inspiration, belief, hope, thinking systems, culture at large. And I don't know, Lisa, you and I have talked about what to make of Chiron, that just seems to keep showing itself in all of these charts, because it lends this undertone of what is the wound? What are all
Mhm.
of these things that are happening out here? What are they're instigating? What kind of healing? Like, what kind of thing is actually asking to be tended to? What's beneath it? What's beneath the surface? These dramas that are occurring in our lives, what underneath it is asking for healing. So there's a piece of that wounding in a lot of these charts that just keeps showing up again and again in different ways. And I think, Lisa, last month you had said you really felt like it was around some of those things about belief system, because
Mhm.
this Poseidon keeps showing up again and again, that we're not held in any collective belief systems in a way that can provide any sense of safety or comfort. Things have gotten a lot more tribal. We see, even on this one here, we see the Venus Cupido come in a little bit. Historically, we've had more access to information now, more access to thoughts and ideas. And I think we're still in our infancy in terms of learning how to navigate that.
when you were talking about the Mars, Neptune, and then the Chiron and the Poseidon, I just thought of a great violation. What's being violated? And then as I looked around this chart, and we have Volcanus coming in, it's a really tough violation that is potentially happening. There's some level of boundaries being crossed and violated and not protected, boundaries not being protected in a very volatile way. But then what's interesting is that we also have Venus and Jupiter tied into this picture as well. And it brings me back to the chart where we're looking at potentially in the fifth house where we have like reproductive rights and feeling of optimism around women as well and women's rights. And we didn't point to that very much within the chart itself. But when I look at this, I wonder if there is fighting for women's rights and the belief that women should have reproductive rights really coming up, especially we're recording this on August 19th. So it's the day that the Democratic convention's beginning. So we don't know what's going to come out of that time. But I know that one of the strong platforms that Kamala Harris has been running on is reproductive rights. And I wonder if this is pointing towards the challenges and also the pains that people have encountered as a result of losing their reproductive rights.
Well, yeah, and there's another thing in combination of stellar influences, they look at this combination and talk about it as a tendency to gain popularity quickly.
Mm,
I think that's because the voice of the woman has shown up since the Aries ingress chart that we had.
yeah,
And when Biden stepped down from running and Kamala came up, it was like a fire swept through the Democratic Party. Really did gain so much support. She raised so much money so quickly.
that's fascinating. At first, we were looking at the sun moon, and then we just pulled this Saturn and Mitos together, and the sun moon falls on the same midpoint. And we felt like this really gave a very powerful picture for the hardships as well as the power of this time. Astrology never gives us a clear picture. It very rarely does. You're going to get some of this and you're going to get some of that. And it's very yin and yang that way. And Saturn and Mitos is a bottleneck. It's a constriction. It's really hard, deliberate work towards something. And I think that this is really emphasizing how we saw the Saturn opposite to the lunation, L1 in the sixth house, conjunct the South Node. And now we're seeing the same theme saying, yes, there's going to be a lot of hardship to overcome and work through this month.
I mean, I think this is a good planetary picture to bring up in conclusion because it really touches on everything. If we go around the chart, we see all of those forces represented. We see the Chronos Apollon, which speaks to the leadership. We
Hmm.
see Hades, which says something about the power dynamics, the control, the intensity, the unearthing, showing us our wound, what still needs to be tended to, much like the Chiron. It's like digging stuff up from the depths. It's
Hmm.
power struggles, it's control, it's sometimes ugly. We see the Cupido Poseidon that talks about the tribal influence and the belief systems and how we're being impacted by that. And we see, like you said, the Saturn at Mitos, which is the consequence of all that. The contracted piece of it, the piece that's hard, the piece that might be zeroing in on the wrong details and miss it altogether. And so I just want to breathe some life into the chart and be like, lighten up, buttercup. It feels heavy.
You're going to make it. There is hardship, but if we can find the joy in it, if we can find the connection with other people, if we can find the power within ourselves and maybe also finding messages that uplift us instead of bring us down. Part of this picture has this real sense of rawness to it. And while things that are raw can sometimes feel more vulnerable, they're also a great place of fertility and a great place to create from as well. So, our feeling quite raw, feeling as though you don't have skin and just vulnerable, take some time to see what wants to be created and what wants to come to life from the raw material that's presenting itself.
Yeah. Keep seeking. Stay
Yeah,
hopeful. Find inspiration. That's a way we can use some of those more challenging chart dynamics.
absolutely. Thank you, everybody. I hope that you enjoyed this Virgo New Moon episode, and we'll see you next month for the solar eclipse. So, really looking forward to that, and we will see you all next time. Take care, everybody.
Follow, subscribe. Come
Yes,
back
please,
again.
please.
Yeah. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.
All right. Bye, everybody.